Hello, everyone, and welcome to our fourth lecture here in Chapter 20, the Columbian Exchange. This is perhaps the most important lecture that we cover all year, just because of the impact that this event actually has on world history. And we're going to be doing a lot of stuff with the Columbian Exchange. So this is a really important lecture for you to know and understand. So let's get into it and talk about the Columbian Exchange. All right, so the Columbian Exchange is really what it says it is. It's an exchange of everything, and it's called the Columbian Exchange because of Christopher Columbus and his voyage to the Americas in 1492 and what is actually going to happen as a result of that connection that's set up. So we're going to see a transfer of food, plants, and animals across the globe. And typically what it's going to be is Old World, Europe, Africa, and Asia with the New World, the Americas. So that's the main part there in terms of the Columbian Exchange. Now, there are a lot of different things that are important in all aspects for what actually happens during this exchange. But in terms of food, the two most important goods that are exchanged are corn and potatoes, and it's because they're very easy to grow and they're high in caloric content. So that allows for people to, it allows them to eat very well, have a lot of calories, and then the population's going to take off. All right, they're inexpensive, they're nutritious, and when people have more access to food, they're going to live longer, population boost. Without the Columbian Exchange, we might not have the world population that we have today. And it's because of these goods that are exchanged in this event that we have that. Now, diseases are also going to be exchanged. We're going to talk more on that a little bit later, but this is going to be kind of a one-sided affair. And not that diseases don't go back and forth. They do. It's just they're going to have a greater impact on the populations in the Americas. All right. So let's talk about what actually exchanged from new to old. So Americas to Europe, Asia, and Africa. We see in terms of crops, the big ones are tomatoes, corn, and potatoes, but you also have things like sweet potatoes and peppers, as well as things like cocoa or cacao beans and vanilla. The biggest fruit that's exchanged is the pineapple, which it's one of my favorites, but there aren't really any more than that. There are some, but not too many. Tobacco is probably going to be the biggest cash crop that's going to be exchanged and have the greatest detrimental impact of all these goods. And then you also have rubber and quinine. And quinine is going to be very important as an ingredient in medicine that will actually help prevent malaria. And that's an important good that's exchanged. In terms of animals, you see very small animals that are exchanged from the New World to the Old. Turkey is perhaps the biggest one in terms of its impact on the table, and then you also have for food on the table, and then you also have the llama and the alpaca. Now, diseases, there's not very many. You have Chagas disease, and then you have syphilis. And syphilis is going to be the one that's really going to be the one that's kind of the payback for the Europeans coming over to the Americas and then getting it and then going back to the old world. All right, so now let's switch to the other side, and this is kind of a bigger list, and you can see that there's a couple categories on here that are actually more impactful here in terms of what's coming from the old world to the new. Fruits are the first one. You see many more different fruits that are actually being exchanged or brought over, such as bananas, which are high in calories and are going to play a role for significant centuries to come, and even to this day in Central America specifically. You're going to see stone fruits, apples, mangoes, and so forth. Other types of produce are onions and olives. And then the big food items here that are actually going to play a role for caloric reasons and helping with population growth are going to be the grains, specifically wheat and rice. Sugarcane is going to make its way from old world to new and is going to find a home and become a very big cash industry in the Caribbean islands, as well as coffee being a staple crop in South America, such as Colombia. Colombia's biggest cash crop is coffee, and it didn't start out there. It was brought over in this exchange. Now, one of the other categories that you see an actual greater impact from old to new and is going to have a greater effect on the people of the New World are animals. And that's because you have draft animals coming over, such as horses, mules, donkeys, and cattle are going to be huge and very important and play several significant roles across the continents, across the Americas. Now, in terms of food reasons and all that other stuff, and as well as for wool, you have sheep and goats, you have chickens, and you have pigs. Pigs are going to grow exponentially very quickly in this time right after the exchange, and they're going to play a huge role there. As you can see, guys, it's an exchange of everything, and it's something that we're used to now because we're living in the world as a result of this Columbian Exchange. Now, here's the tipping point. This is the one I kind of mentioned already in terms of diseases being the ones that really impact the people of the New World. Well, just look at between this last slide and this slide, just the main diseases that are exchanged from old to new. Smallpox is going to kill off millions very quickly. The influenza virus, the flu, that is going to kill millions off quickly. Malaria is an important disease that comes over, measles and so forth. Now, that's important because the Americans, the people of the New World, they don't have built up immunities to these diseases, and it's why they're affected so greatly. And in some instances, people think that as many as 90% of Americans died because of disease, the diseases that were exchanged in this Columbian Exchange. All right, so now this is an actual graphic of it. You guys can see what I really just talked about. So you can see where things actually came from and where they went. So you see this line right here is everything going from new to old, and then this one is from old to new. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about global trade that's set up because of the Columbian Exchange. You have goods plus trade leads to wealth. And this is very important, although very simple, because it leads to really the roots of the economic change in Europe and what ultimately is going to allow Europe to take over the world in a very short period of time with its empires, specifically that of Britain and France, as well as obviously the Spanish for the early part of this period. Now, capitalism is going to build out of the idea of mercantilism, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But it's all about ownership and investment in profit. If you have ownership and investment for monetary reasons, that's capitalism. And really what ends up happening once the Columbian Exchange happens and then this global trade takes off, you see that individuals become sole owners of wealth and not the governments. So one of the driving forces behind, if you guys remember, this age of exploration that led to the Columbian Exchange was that really governments or states were the only ones that could actually afford these expeditions. Well, once this global trade takes off, that changes and individuals can actually gain huge sources of wealth and grow their own businesses. And it's because of this development in the trade and this idea of capitalism. There's an economic opportunity, which leads to a rise in the money supply, which leads to an inflation and prices go up. All right, so we're going to talk about joint stock companies. Now this, even though I just talked about kind of on the previous slide where we had individuals being able to really grow their wealth, it's not, this is a kind of a slow change. So you kind of move from the states being the only ones to fund these journeys and gain the wealth to the individual, but there's kind of an in-between there. And this actually still exists a little bit today, but they're called joint stock companies. And really what this is, it's a group of investors that have a common interest or venture that they want to go in on, but they can't afford it by themselves. So they come together. And basically what ends up happening is you have several joint stock companies that are formed during the period around the Columbian Exchange Columbus's adventures taking place, and then after his founding of the New World, with the goal being primarily American colonization. And you need the money, and it's very high risk. So these groups of investors, by forming these joint stock companies, actually allows each individual investor to reap the benefits of the rewards of these new colonies or expeditions, but also only incur minimal risk. So it's kind of, instead of being just high risk, high reward, it's lower risk, better reward. So that's a huge advantage there with joint stock companies. An example of this would be the British East India Company, Dutch East India Company, and so forth. All right, so I told you we were going to talk about mercantilism a little bit earlier, and basically the idea behind mercantilism is that there's the theory that a country's power is synonymous with its wealth. So wealth equals power, power equals wealth. And wealth basically allows the country to do whatever it wants. It can buy the goods it needs, build the armies and navies it needs to protect itself and to expand. The whole goal under mercantilism for the country itself is to get as much wealth as possible. And how do you increase your wealth? Well, you do it in two ways. One, you do it by just gaining as much gold and silver as you can, either directly through mining it or through trade and exchange. And the second way is through what we call a balance of trade, where basically it's not really a balance, it's a, hey, I sell more than I buy. If you can sell more than you buy, then you're making money and adding into that first increase of wealth, with the whole ultimate goal being of self-sufficiency. These various empires, they're fighting for land, they're fighting for power, they're fighting for resources. And if they can become self-sufficient, that means that they can actually hold something over their rivals, whether it's they're able to defeat them in battle, whether it's, hey, this rival needs these goods, I can sell it to him for a marked up price, whatever. The goal here is ultimate self-sufficiency. And colonization is actually going to be what allows this to happen and or helps these situations or mercantilism to take off. Now we're going to see various forms of this colonization throughout history. For the sake of this course right now, we're just looking at directly after the Columbian Exchange. So really the two big countries you want to consider yourself with colonization in this principle are going to be the Spanish Empire in the Americas and the globe, and then the British as well. All right, so here is an actual political cartoon kind of showing off the idea of mercantilism using colonial expansion. And you can see you have the mother country looking like the Queen of England, and then you have the colonies that are giving her various things, such as gold and silver, food, or raw materials. All right, just a few more slides here. So as all this stuff happens, you have a revolution in changes taking place. Now, I don't mean a revolution directly in terms of like an actual war, but a revolution in thinking and thought and ways of life and how things operate. So you have economic changes. As the economies change in Europe, society changes to meet that monetary change or opportunity change. Towns and cities start to grow rapidly because you have all these goods coming in. In particular, you have all this food, so you have rising populations. You start to see merchants gaining higher controls of wealth, so they can trade in cities and new businesses take up and so forth. Now, doesn't mean that everybody does well. Much of Europe for a long period of time is still going to remain rural and poor, but you do start seeing the wealth of Europe increasing from not only a mercantile standpoint, a merchant standpoint, but also across those nations as well. All right. And sorry, I was a little off there in terms of our slide numbers. That was our last one. I hope you guys had learned a lot with this in this slide or lecture. Now you'll notice I didn't tell you guys to star anything. The reason being is because this entire lecture is something that you need to know and learn by heart, because if you can understand this one, you're going to understand not only the entire chapter, but everything moving forward. All right, guys, have a good one.